So much for joining us here today for this webinar on wrapping up warm this winter. So pleased to have you all here. For those who don't know me, I'm Annie. I am a senior political advisor at Green Alliance, and I also worked on the Warm This Winter campaign. So I had the privilege of knowing lots of people that you're going to hear from today. So firstly, I just wanted to say, if you would like to introduce yourself, say hi, please do feel free to use the chat function for that. We'd love to see who's in the room and hear from you all. But on today, so after more than 2 years of campaigning, the Warm This Winter campaign officially wrapped up last Monday, which feels very much like the end of an era. Over the years, more than 50 organisations have come together, often for the first time, to demand action on energy bills and ensure access to affordable energy in the future. So today we're going to reflect on our respective roles in the campaign, drawing out our key lessons learned for future campaigns. And this is because whilst we saw so many successes over the years, we're aware that there is so much more to do. So before I let you all know how today is going to run, I'm going to firstly hand over to Chris Venables, one of the architects of the Warm This Winter campaign, to give a little bit of a brief overview of the impact that we've had. Thank you.
Morning, everyone, and thanks, Annie, for the introduction. Yeah, I'm Chris, Director of Politics at Green Alliance, and yeah, have worked with many others to help set up Warm This Winter as part of the and sat on the organising committee for the duration of the campaign. I suppose a few things to say. I was thinking back because of everything that's going on at the moment with Trump and tariffs and some of the backsliding we've seen from the Labour government around how to respond in these moments of crisis. And I think sometimes it feels like the world out there is impossible, and how do we meet it? But thinking back to that time in spring 2022, the Johnson government had published the British Energy Security Strategy, which was in response to the Ukraine war, and I think lots of us felt, kind of seeing reactions from different groups across civil society that was a little bit underwhelming, both on the clean power front, but also on the support that was going to be available in the short and medium term to vulnerable households. So yeah, I think it was just a real moment of seeing that between different groups there was quite a bit of alignment, and that what brought together groups thinking about poverty, groups thinking about kind of families on the front line of that cost of living crisis, had a lot in common with groups also thinking about the climate crisis and the environmental agenda, which was in essence a broken energy system. So lots of folks on the call and brilliant speakers will talk about what we achieved, and I will leave that to them. But yeah, I suppose the message from us is that in these moments that feel difficult and challenging, we can do things differently, and there were quite a few hairy moments in setting up a campaign that brought together so many disparate groups and people who thought about the world differently, people whose theories of change and tactics were really different. But that we can and we should try and meet these big moments. So yeah, I'll hand back to you, Annie. But yeah, thanks from us at Green Alliance to everyone who did take part in the campaign. It really was a huge team effort across many organisations and hundreds of people. So look forward to hearing some of what we achieved from the folks and the panelists and those who are involved.
Thank you so much, Chris. And yeah, we'll definitely delve into both the hairy moments and the positive success of the campaign. I think we really want this to feel like this is a useful event for all those that are still really actively campaigning in this space. So please, we'd love to kind of have this be an active and open discussion. So a little bit on how today is going to work. So we're going to jump into a panel discussion now where we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So please do use the Q&A function if you have any questions throughout, and we'll try and get to those towards the end. And we really do have a great panel. So we're joined by Connor Rowden, the network coordinator at Uplift, who is the co-lead of the mobilisations work for the campaign. by Simon Francis, the coordinator of the End Pure Poverty Coalition, and by Kat Curie, who is the senior campaign activism advisor at Friends of the Earth. So have the breadth of people who have worked sort of in the coordination of the campaign, and then partners who have been involved, very actively involved. So yeah, a good mix. So I'm going to turn over to Connor now for some reflections on sort of the grassroots and mobilisations element of the campaign. Thanks, Connor.
Thanks so much, Annie. Yeah, so as Annie said, I, at least for the latter part of the campaign, co-led the kind of mobilisations activity alongside my fantastic colleague Mia, who is not on this call but deserves a shout out anyway. And I think, yeah, I'll just kind of start by saying that I'm sure as a lot of people on this call probably know already, but any effective coalition that's pushing for change absolutely has to include the grassroots and engage people beyond the kind of formal kind of professional sector. The history of social movements has kind of proven this to be true, and I think maybe just to touch on what Chris said about like the political moment that we're in, that kind of community-led organising will be so important over the coming years, and is always important, but particularly the moment that we kind of find ourselves in now. And I think particularly with a campaign like Warm This Winter that is trying to shine a light on the kind of deep inequality and injustice that exists in our energy system and society more broadly, and to try and centre those who are kind of at the sharpest edge of that, many of whom are doing service provision and mutual aid in their communities alongside grassroots action. So yeah, just to kind of highlight why I think it's so important. In terms of what we did, we had a mobilisations working group that was one of 3 working groups alongside politics and comms. And that was a regular meeting space that we convened and had a real kind of mix of different partners, some from NGOs who had their own local group networks, some more kind of grassroots or kind of local reps, and really folks working on all kinds of different cross-cutting issues kind of under the Warm This Winter umbrella. And that was primarily a space for collaboration on actions, demos, events, to kind of organise things actively together, to share ideas, but also to share updates on kind of upcoming partner mobilisations activity, making sure there weren't kind of any major clashes, making sure that we were doing things that was, aligned and complementary, and helping to support each other's work wherever we could. And we had a few in-person strategy days as well to kind of plan that out. Just a few key moments that kind of came out of that space that really kind of showcased the power of coming together. With the help of partners and grassroots groups across the UK, we organised a National Day of Action on the 3rd of December 2022, which saw 40 events happening up and down the UK, including 2 big flagship events in Stoke-on-Trent and London, which got some really great media coverage. A few months later, we had a mass lobby where people were encouraged to meet with their local politicians to discuss the campaign. That saw over 90 individual lobbies take place with one-to-one meetings with MPs, MSs, MSPs, photos outside of offices, and again, lots of really great kind of media coverage and conversations there. Alongside that, we also had a bunch of digital actions like open letters that were hosted on the Warm This Winter website that several thousand people signed up to our mailing list, took part in. I should say a really key part of this activity was also sub-granting. So we had a programme of grants for grassroots and community groups to kind of help them to deliver activities that would help build public support and political support for Warm This Winter, and to also just really try and deepen grassroots participation in the campaign, which I think, that's a really key way that organisations can support that activity through direct funding. I think particularly when folks are doing that on a volunteer basis alongside other work, that funding can be really, really key and really kind of transformative. So that was a really key part of what we did. And we also tried to sort of strengthen those groups along the way and kind of skill share, host trainings, connect them to others. We had a grassroots gathering in Manchester in November 2024, which brought all of those 8 groups together that we funded, and there were workshops on some of the kind of shared challenges they were facing, again, sharing resources, contacts, and that was just a really nice way to bring everyone together. I've got, I think, a minute, so I'll just quickly rattle through some of the key learnings, but then we can come to more of that in the Q&A. I think maybe some reflections on what we could have maybe done a bit differently. think at times connecting that mobilisations working group to the kind of very local sub-granting activity was sometimes a challenge, and I think more moments where that could happen. So maybe more gatherings, more points throughout the year where we could bring those together a bit more neatly, I think would have been good. Similarly, deeper collaboration between the kind of mobilisations activity and communications functions. I think building that trust and those relationships and kind of press contacts at local level does really take time. So I think having even more time to do that. And then unsurprisingly, the election really kind of threw things out of whack a bit. So a lot of groups had to kind of change plans and adapt and do things to a shorter timescale. So that also kind of, I think, was a bit of a challenge. But yeah, can share more and happy to take any questions in the Q&A. But back to you, Annie.
Thank you so much, Connor. Yeah, that was brilliant. I think there was such a breadth of tactics that you mentioned there, which I'm sure that others will love to delve into more in the discussion and the Q&A. But I think, yeah, you've really spoken to a lot of the movement generosity that was practiced in amongst the mobilisations group. So thank you so much. That was brilliant. I think we'll now turn over to Simon, who is going to talk a little bit about why it's so important that fuel poverty and climate groups continue to work together, which we've already touched on a little bit, and the ongoing work of the End Fuel Poverty Coalition. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Annie, and hello, everyone. So yeah, my name's Simon Francis. I'm coordinator of the End Fuel Poverty Coalition. We represent over 100 civil society organisations, ranging from those who campaign almost exclusively on fuel poverty, but also include a lot of health organisations, disability groups, other charities and campaigners. And we're also supported by a range of academics who have a huge amount of expertise and knowledge in this area, right across the four kind of areas that Warm This Winter focused on. So, bringing down bills in the short term and emergency support, through to energy efficiency, increasing the use of renewables and ending oil and gas. And I think one of the things that Warm This Winter really brought to our attention was sort of the interconnection between all of those issues, and how we can have a future where we have lower bills, warmer homes, and a greener future, and that is something that is inspiring to many of the groups that are represented by the coalition. We obviously were a core part of the coalition, not just in terms of providing information and support from our members for the activities that the campaign undertook, but also I was often used as a spokesperson for quite a few of the news stories. So kind of was up there sort of talking about the messages that we were trying to land on a kind of almost at times daily basis. But I think some of the benefits from a comms perspective, particularly just to build on what Connor was saying, that were really impressive from the Warm This Winter campaign, was just the rapid reaction and mobilising huge groups of people from right across the green and poverty spaces to come together and talk with a single voice on some of the issues that we were talking about. And clearly, the value of that collaboration has seen in terms of going back to the introduction of the windfall tax by Rishi Sunak when he was Chancellor, which is then sort of built upon a huge win very early on in the campaign, which obviously again is sort of something that we worked with quite an even broader group of people on tax justice and taxing polluters agenda to bring that about. But that was a huge early win, and also during the peak of the energy crisis, to see the government intervene with the energy price guarantee and the energy bill support scheme, the largest single universal household support measure that has ever been introduced in the country, pretty much. And to get that as a result of the crisis is definitely down to the work of kind of everybody who took part. So huge delivery was achieved, as well as kind of the comms, the mobilisations, and the political support. And also, we sort of, have obviously seen in terms of kind of the new government coming in, very much changing its language and using language that is in line with some of the things that we were talking about, at least during the election campaign. There's probably a wider debate about how much they're still doing that. I think there's a couple of other things that helped with the campaign, really assisted with, and that is one is about actually understanding the energy system. I think so much of it is sort of shrouded in very technical information that you need to spend years and years working in the energy industry to actually even begin to understand. But by coming together by some of the reports that were published, by pooling expertise, we were able to analyse what was going on in the energy industry, and we certainly have a much better idea now about how our energy system functions, the problems with it, and what we can do to change them. So obviously that does imply that things are over. We very much are aware that energy bills are still over 70% higher than they were back before the start of the crisis. Gas prices are still very volatile. There's some very big discussions still taking place. Reform of electricity market arrangements, the Carbon Budget 7, and some of the projections that the Climate Change Committee are making in terms of what we need to do. And linked into that, of course, redistribution of levies that, onto gas and bills, which, there's some the big choices that are made there will have significant implications in terms of the numbers of people who are going to be living in cold, damp homes going forward. So the End Fuel Poverty Coalition will continue to campaign on all of these issues. This year, we're especially focused on affordability and discrimination. Some of the problems with the smart meter rollout, the radio tele switch off, which will see, possibly 100,000 households in Scotland have their meters stop working from the start of June, and in other parts of the country, but it's particularly a problem in Scotland. The reforms to the warm home discount, social tariff, the fuel poverty strategy review, the ongoing inquiries that into the energy market by Ofgem and by the House of Commons Energy Select Committee. But also kind of looking at the long term, making sure that we have people who are in the worst homes supported first through the Warm Homes Plan. Getting the 13.2 billion that Labour have promised for that plan is in itself a very short-term thing that we need to all campaign on. And of course, the windfall tax is also being reviewed. And there's still more that we could do to highlight some of the problems with energy markets, energy trading, lots of different areas that are still all contributing to our bills being at record levels. So we'll still be continuing to fight on all of those fronts, and we are also starting to look at how we can continue the work that Warm This Winter have done with more kind of public-facing campaigning work in collaboration with people such as the Green Homes Group, with Green Alliance, with the local storytelling exchange. So if people are interested in sort of taking this forward and continuing the fight, then we are absolutely going to continue to do that and do it in a public setting, and we'd be very happy to have conversations with you. But I think that's pretty much me.
Thank you so much, Simon. Yeah, I would absolutely encourage everyone to take Simon up on that offer, because the Energy Poverty Coalition is an absolute powerhouse with people who have been campaigning on these issues for decades. So very, very knowledgeable group. I think also it's funny, Simon, hearing you talk back over the past few years and just how much has changed. You're talking about, Rishi Sunak and the measures that he brought in, and how much politics has shifted since the campaign began. And I think that's all playing into what we've already heard today. So yeah, thank you so much. Really interesting. I'll now turn over to Kat, who, as I mentioned previously, is from Friends of the Earth, so was a partner on the Warm This Winter campaign, but also had their own Warm Homes campaign work that Kat is going to talk us through. So talk a little bit about the importance of partnerships and collaborations more broadly. So thanks, Kat.
No worries. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Kat. I'm the Senior Campaign Activism Advisor for Friends of the Earth, and I also co-led Friends of the Earth's United for Warm Homes campaign over the last 3-ish years, working closely alongside the Warm This Winter Coalition. So Friends of the Earth was involved in lots of the actions and tactics coordinated by Warm This Winter from the beginning, as well as organising our own complementary campaigning tactics at the national and the local level. At the peak of our campaign, we had around 100 Friends of the Earth local groups campaigning for warm homes locally. So organising events, meeting with MPs, running craftivism activities, and crucially working in partnership with other local organisations. I've been asked to say a few words on the value of working in coalition and partnerships. So at Friends of the Earth, when we first started designing our United for Warm Homes campaign, which was just a bit before the Warm This Winter coalition was formed, We absolutely knew that we couldn't do it alone. We knew that we didn't have the power to effectively influence the current or the future government on this issue. And we also knew that just playing that green environmental card wasn't going to be effective on this issue. We really needed to be talking about the benefits of taking action on the energy crisis from a variety of reasons. And we really need to show that there was a wide range of like power from different constituencies behind the call at the national and the local level as well, which is why we thought that the Warm This Winter Coalition was so important and why we were so grateful to be part of it. And I think not only did we know that we couldn't do it alone, but we also knew that we shouldn't do it alone. We needed our policy demands to be shaped by those most impacted by the energy crisis. I think that's why we're really thankful for the work of the End Fuel Poverty Coalition and others for their support in helping us kind of shape demands. I think we did shift at Friends of the Earth, we shifted our original demands for the United Warm Homes campaign to really put urgent financial support for people as our first policy demand, which for an environmental organisation like ours wasn't potentially, our natural first go-to demand. We would have been thinking, insulation, heat pumps, but having kind of people first and the people most impacted first as our kind of primary demand, really came from listening to the End Fuel Poverty Coalition and others. Throughout the last 2-3 years, we built some brilliant connections and partnerships, which we really hope will outlast this campaign, including with members of the coalition, also Trussell Trust, MedAct, Disability Rights UK, and others. And just as importantly, our local groups have built some amazing partnerships at the grassroots level. We really pushed our groups in this campaign to go beyond their kind of normal go-to environmental partners. And as a result, we've seen some brilliant kind of relationships being formed with local mosques, food banks, volunteer centres, sports clubs, and more. It's definitely been one of the biggest challenges of the campaign for us as well. It's work that takes a long time. It can feel like a slog sometimes, and it doesn't have immediate successes, but it's also been really fruitful, and we're really confident that those relationships can be built on going forwards as well. I've also just been asked to touch on how Friends of the Earth will continue to campaign on warm homes going forward. So our Unite Warm Homes campaign is actually wrapped up as well last month, at the same time as Warm This Winter. And we're now deep into evaluating the campaign, which we can share with anyone who's interested. But of course, the work doesn't fully stop, and we are still obviously very passionate and committed to warm homes. One tactic that is going to be happening hopefully this month is that we've been trying for a while now to secure a backbench business committee debate on warm homes in Parliament, which has been delayed a few times, but is now likely to take place at the end of this month. We're hopeful that this is a useful opportunity to get the issue heard in Parliament and to continue that steady drumbeat of pressure ahead of the publication of the Warm Homes Plan later this year. Of course, when the Warm Homes Plan is published, we'll be ready to assess its merit and react accordingly. And just because our national Unite Warm Homes campaign has come to an end, and the Warm This Winter Coalition, it doesn't mean that our groups are going to stop. So our local groups lots of them will still continue to campaign for warm homes locally. And we've just issued some new guidance for our groups to help them take their campaigns forward independently, including helping them shift the focus from the national to also the council and the regional level. We really feel that the combined authority mayors are set to be really important going forwards with Labour's devolution plans, and we'll likely see an increased responsibility on the mayors outlined in the Warm Homes Plan. Our Friends of the Earth groups are really well set up to lobby at that mayoral level. Lots of them have ran really strong election campaigns and have strong relationships with existing mayors and the candidates ahead of this May's elections. Centrally at Friends of the Earth, we're now focused on our Big Climate Plan campaign, which is demanding that the government publish a bold and fair climate plan. And one of our 5 key demands is to ensure that everyone can live in a warm home powered by cheap, clean energy. So after influencing the Warm Homes Plan, this is really where we saw the next route to achieving policy change at the Westminster level. So this is where our focus is now for the next 6-ish months. I'm going to wrap up there. I know we've got loads to discuss, lots of lessons to learn. But yeah, big thanks to the Warm This Winter Coalition for all their coordination and fantastic work.
Thank you so much, Kat. That was brilliant. And yeah, I definitely would love to pull on the thread a little bit about the local engagement. That sounds like a really interesting piece of work that you're doing there. I'll now ask if all the panel can turn their cameras on so that we can have a little bit of a panel discussion. I first wanted to ask, and we've already touched upon a little bit of this in some of your answers, but if you were to start a new campaign, and we're hopeful there may be many future campaign starters in the room today, what would you change, and is there anything you would definitely keep? You would like to go first? Simon, thank you.
Go on then. Yeah, so I think one thing that I think when we were reflecting on this as a group is I think we looked very much into the sort of the long term and sort of had very big kind of big bold demands, and I'm not sure that we were clear enough in our own minds about kind of what the steps along the way were, and that would have enabled us to actually kind of not celebrate, because we know that there's a big job to do, and kind of almost whatever we get is not going to be enough. Just appreciate when we have actually achieved something and got policy change, or kind of got a mobilisations event, or even got a good kind of communications response to an issue over the line, and kind of and just sort of recognise what does that kind of success and those smaller successes along the way look like, because I think we were kind of perhaps very kind of driven by, right, we've done this, now let's get on to the next thing, and churned out a huge amount of work, which as we've said is kind of like helped enormously in terms of shifting the debate, putting the issues on the agenda, and helping to educate not just ourselves but also policy officials, politicians, the wider media and public about kind of the energy industry. So I do think kind of if we were to do it again, we should sort of like think a bit more about what are the sort of the smaller steps along the way, and kind of mark those as a group, and sort of as I say, recognise the achievements that we do, because it is it's hard work.
I think that's so true, Simon. I think when your overall goal is to change the whole energy system, it's useful to have some milestones along the way to celebrate. I think that's very true, particularly as the campaign lasted over the course of a few years. So yeah, thank you so much. Connor, Kat, I'd be really interested as well on this question of how might a new campaign better integrate the local or grassroots right at the beginning, making sure we sort of have time to build up those relationships over time. Is there anything that you could say on that point? Connor, go for it.
Yeah, I can jump in. Yeah, I think there was kind of a shift, I guess, at the kind of start of the campaign. There was a focus of kind of building momentum towards these bigger mobilisation moments, like the Day of Action, like the mass lobby. We also had, quite a few sort of joint petition hand-ins with partners. And then kind of after that, we had this sort of longer term kind of sub-granting program, and kind of deeper focus on engaging more with grassroots groups. And I think, but we didn't have another sort of big moment. I think that was a kind of conscious decision and just a sort of capacity thing as well. But I think having those two running alongside each other could have been really, really effective, and ensuring that the momentum we kind of built up in the first part of the campaign could really kind of be built on even further, and that we could bring even more grassroots groups in and kind of support their involvement in those bigger moments, as well as, yeah, I completely agree with what Kat said, that kind of very local community focused work is often less visible, and it does take more time, and there's not these kind of immediate press headlines or things that go alongside it. But yeah, I think it would have been great to kind of build on that at the same time, and also maybe offering kind of longer grants. 12 months seems like a long time, but it goes really quick. I think particularly when you're focusing on just building a relationship to begin with, and getting to know people. So I think maybe if the grants had been 2 years, for example, I'm sure all the incredible groups, all of which I wish I could name check, but there's too many to list, could have done even more like amazing stuff. And I know that they will continue to, but yeah.
Yeah, I so agree with that, Connor. And I would just emphasize that for a lot of NGOs, like a 2 year campaign feels like a long time, long commitment, but actually that is such a short kind of time frame for local grassroots groups. Like really, we should be committing to more like 5 year sorts of campaigns. And I know that's so hard for a big NGOs to stay with an issue for that long. And we might need to kind of change it up a little bit in terms of the framing, but for groups, it's so important to stick with those issues. I'd also say maybe there's a challenge for bigger NGOs to make sure that we're helping the relationships we form at the national level, like filter down to the local level. So a lot of, our groups are great at building, they know their own communities the best, they are able to make those connections, but how could we like help, I suppose, facilitate those relationships a little bit more? Yeah, from the local from the national to the local, but also like seeing what's happening at the local level and connecting that up through like the regional and to the national level as well.
I love that point, Kat. I think that Brill would be really keen as well if you could give any examples of sort of when that might have been done successfully, because I think it's something that a lot of NGOs, I talk with bigger NGOs, talk about wanting to do, sort of telegraphing some of that information down. It's always a little bit of where are the communication channels? How do we start building those relationships? So would be, if you have any reflections on how that can be done well, that would be fab.
Yeah, I mean, we saw pockets of it. I think, so for example, a lot of our groups worked with food banks at the local level, and we started making those connections from the local to kind of at the regional level and then at the national. I think a reflection for us was that we didn't have enough of those conversations with the national organizations early on enough in the campaign to really kind of co-build this together. So it kind of, by the time we'd actually really formed those relationships, the campaign was quite a long way in. So yeah, definitely a learning for us is making sure that those kind of partnership conversations can happen earlier on. But yes, I think things like that, like the food banks, they were such a good kind of connections at the local level, and we just needed to work out how to do that better going up the chain.
I think, yeah, that's a great reflection. I think it always comes back to having more conversations sooner and more often. It feels, which is brilliant. I then wanted to just ask about, and again, we've spoken a little bit about this, but what some of the key ingredients are for effective partnerships and collaborations. How do you maintain the good relationships amongst partners working on the same issue over either a short period of time or a long period of time? If there's any top tips for collaborations. Connor, go for it.
I can, yeah, maybe just kind of, yeah, carrying on the threads that we were touching on just there. I think particularly from the perspective of kind of, yeah, like larger sort of often London or Westminster based kind of charities or NGOs working with smaller local groups. I think there's, yeah, three things. Like I think being really proactive and clear on the support that you can offer from the beginning, and that it's kind of, if there is a funding relationship there, it's not just about the funding, it's as much about like building the relationship, what direct support you can provide, and the collaboration that kind of leads to. I think secondly, like trust is so important, and that does take a bit of time to build, but just primarily first and foremost listening to those groups rather than being too prescriptive, kind of understanding what they need, and kind of letting them run with ideas. Like as Kat said, they have a much more deep and meaningful understanding of the local context and the ideas that work for people and empower people to solve issues kind of collectively. And I think finally as well, like if you're able to, leaving Westminster and leaving London and just going and actually spending time with these groups, with people in the places they're based in the places they work in. If they need an extra pair of hands at an event, offer to help out. Like I was very lucky that my role kind of gave me the flexibility to do that. But yeah, it really does go a long way in just connecting with people. It might seem like a really obvious one, but I think it's super important.
Love that. I've just got leave London underlined on my notes. So yeah, thank you. Simon.
As someone who's permanently left London, I suppose I should follow on from that. But I think it raises a really important point because so much of policy in this area is devolved, especially around the warm home side of things, and that kind of and even within kind of English regions as well, and even within regions, there's so much difference in terms of housing stock, in terms of the fuel poverty agenda, that actually listening to what people say and hearing the fact that how people are affected by this differently across the whole of the UK, I think is important, and understanding the different priorities for change that those different communities will have is vital. And I think within that becomes a part of respecting and understanding that there is going to be difference of opinion. So we have that in the End Fuel Poverty Coalition on a regular basis about people who are all wanting to achieve the same goals, but may have kind of difference of opinion in terms of how we go about doing that. And I think we need to sort of, and I think one of the great things about the Women's Winter campaign was just actually how that those conversations were had in a kind of really respectful way, and that we worked hard to try and make sure that everyone could sign on to as much as possible. And we obviously know that there's going to be some things that people just go, we can't sign on to that publicly, and that's fine. And I think that's the nature of coalition working, and I think that again was a big success or a big learning for people wanting to sort of replicate this going forward.
Thank you, Simon. Before I turn to Kat, just wanted to say we'll shortly jump into a Q&A with the audience, so please do pop questions in the Q&A box. I can already see a couple, but would be fab to have more, so please do pick the panelists' brains. Kat, is there any other reflections you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think Connor and Simon covered loads there. I think maybe the other thing that I think worked well is, I suppose, for big NGOs to make sure that we're really reflecting on the power dynamics, what we can give up, the flexibility that we need to have, which doesn't always come naturally. But also I think that sub grants, in terms of actually giving up not just power but finances, is really important to make sure that that power is actually given up, is actually can we make sure that we're funding smaller organizations, the grassroots, to really empower them to lead the work as well.
Thank you, Kat. That's a really good reflection. Thank you. Amazing. So we have a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is from Linda, who is saying the new coalition Retrofit for the Future seems an exciting development, which it definitely does. Can anyone tell us more about it? I know Fuel Poverty Action is involved. I'm not sure, Simon, if that's something that you're aware of. Otherwise, we can follow up with Linda.
Yeah, I mean, I can briefly say yes, we're aware of it. It's probably need to be more aware of it. It's only just launched, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So is a key part of what we need to see happen. And I think it's good to see as well the focus on quality retrofit and the skills that are needed for that in particular coming to the fore. I think, and this is something playing into what is now on the government's agenda, which is that there's been too much poor quality retrofit. And I think as a challenge going forward, I think that this is going to be interesting to see how the retrofit industry and the champions of retrofit respond to that, and having the light shone on their practices in a slightly different way and in a more focused way, because it is absolutely, we shouldn't be doing low quality work. We should be making sure that no one's home is left worse as a result of retrofit, and I think it's important that continues to have a light shone on it and a focus put on it.
Thank you, Simon. Very great intel. If you didn't know much about it, you sounded like you did know a lot about it, so thank you very much. And thanks, Connor, for popping that link in the chat for all those who want to hear more about it. The next question we have is from Joel, who's thinking about this kind of setup for a transport campaign in the future, which sounds brilliant. And they're asking what the panel would recommend for such a coalition, both what to repeat and what to do differently. I suppose if you were starting a campaign like this in a whole new area, how might you go about it, and what would be some of the kind of key tips?
I can take a quick stab. I think it'd be fantastic if we had a coalition on transport. I think that'd be brilliant. I think one of the things definitely to keep with what we did before is making sure that we're really focusing on like the co-benefits of this. And I think transport works really nicely for that because there's so many different angles that you could come at it from, and from the environmental, but also from the social mobility or from disability angle as well. So yeah, I definitely think that I think that would keep I would definitely keep that in terms of what Warm This Winter has done, is making sure lots of different partners are involved in shaping the strategy, but also the messaging and the policy demands. I think what might be tricky with or trickier with something around transport is just with Warm This Winter, the reason why so many organizations came together at the same time with so much energy was because it was in that kind of the zeitgeist. It was what everyone was talking about. It was what was in the news daily. So I think for another issue, we'd either have to try and find like that's like an opportunity or something that kind of makes it feel like it's within the public narrative. Not saying it's impossible for transport, but I think that we also just need to make sure that we keep looking externally to see what are people talking about, where is the energy, and where are those opportunities.
Thank you so much, Kat. Definitely got an advocate for transport in our midst with Kat, because that was a great campaign. I think we should definitely set that up. Simon, yes.
Yeah, just on transport, something that's started to kind of come up a bit more, and so as we see kind of like more use of electric vehicles into the future, we are going to see kind of obviously therefore the costs of transport moving from paying at the forecourt to paying through your home energy bills. So we're kind of aware of that as something that's definitely kind of coming down the line, perhaps relatively quicker, well, possibly a bit slower now after the government's announcements this week, but still something we need to be aware of. And I think also then understanding kind of actually if that's happening and we wanted to keep energy bills still low and we don't want to increase the levels of people in fuel poverty because of now having to shift the costs of this onto household energy bills, actually the role of public transport and integrated transport is going to be potentially far more important, and is something that I'm going to stop talking because I don't actually know very much about it, and really actually now feel like possibly that we all need to as fuel poverty campaigners. So it's something that, definitely very interesting and has kind of quite wider ranging kind of implications as well.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, Connor?
Yeah, completely agree with both Kat and Simon. I guess another thing maybe just to think about as well. Sorry if you just heard the really loud car horn outside. I live on a busy road. Very topical to the question. I think, thinking about at the start of the campaign, just like being really clear on like who's already doing this work, who's been doing this work for a long time. And I think as well, like something that didn't come up a lot in Warm This Winter, but is maybe more relevant to transport is like union engagement. Is that something that feels important and relevant? I would argue that it is. And in terms of Joel, just maybe to kind of get into your question a bit more, maybe some of the learnings, I think like clarity on decision making, particularly when it comes to the campaign demands, when you have a coalition that's really broad and people who are kind of wanting to, I guess, different levels of kind of ambition, different priorities, how you kind of come together around a shared demand, and that there's a real clarity and kind of people feel involved in those decisions, I think is important.
Thanks, Connor. Yeah, that car horn was definitely a paid actor for your answer there, so thank you. Brill, I think one thing, Simon, you touched on it a little bit, and we've spoken about it slightly, but I think that the way in which Warm This Winter was designed, where it had the kind of very clear comms element and the rapid response joined up with the mobilizations and the political, I think was a really cool dynamic, and kind of speaks to some of the things that you've mentioned. And I wondered if we could reflect a little bit more on the importance of comms, particularly because as Kat said, this was sort of started in the midst of the energy crisis, and so a lot of the goal of Warm This Winter was sort of to try and shift that narrative slightly, or at least be involved. And I think you did that really, really effectively. So I don't know, Simon, if you have reflections on particularly what went well in the comms what might you do differently in the comms if you were to do a new campaign?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, I'll perhaps pick up on what could be done differently, rather than sort of going on about how great we are, because you can read about that, I'm sure, in reports and things like that. I think the biggest challenge was, as I'm sure everyone on the school will appreciate, is getting case studies and getting that, translating that kind of that local voice from people who want to take action but don't want to speak out in a very public setting, and I completely understand why, and trying to sort of take people through that journey and do much more work on kind of having lived experience at the heart of not just kind of like how we're developing policy, but also at the heart of speaking out about it, and how we can try and I think that would be the number one thing that I think we all need to sort of think a lot more about how we do that, and make sure that that lived experience comes through. I think as well, just in terms of the kind of the workload, it's a lot. I mean, we were lucky to have, amazing comms colleagues, not just as part of the secretariat, but also pulling on the resources from other charities and partners for the Warm Winter campaign. And we certainly couldn't have done it without them, but it was quite a heavy lift. And I still, as well, don't feel we actually managed to crack the kind of, and I still don't think this happens, we haven't cracked the kind of need for a shared planner. And kind of just being a lot more ruthless about kind of actually collaborating a lot stronger on when we're putting things out, so that people have clear support and everyone comes in behind other people to help amplify what people are doing. And I think we're still quite a way. We never cracked that as Warm as Winter, and I still think that's something that needs to be done, because I think that is absolutely crucial. I think in any future campaign.
Thanks, Simon. That's so interesting. And yeah, I can definitely vouch for the fact that you all on the comms side and the partners too was a very hefty lift. So yeah, well done to everybody that was involved and has been involved in that. So thank you. I can't see any more questions, so I think we'll wrap up there. Unless Simon, was that a final word that you wanted?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on just Susan. Susan's put a comment in the chat just about I think it's just picking up on the retrofit campaign, and just going, what about net zero or future home standards? Absolutely, Susan. This is why we need sort of more broader campaigning on a whole range of the kind of the homes upgrades that we need to see. Retrofit is absolutely part of it, but we do need to make sure that the future home standards is right. We need to look at, obviously we're working with renters reform coalitions to make sure that the kind of the private rented sector stuff is happening. The renters reform bill. We also need to as well think about kind of about the heat source as well, and heat pumps and how people are getting their energy. So there's a much bigger kind of set of demands around cold homes that we need to come together on and campaign on. As I say, the Warm Homes Plan is going to be crucial to that, but we know it's not going to go anywhere near far enough. So I think that is something that's part of one of the things that we're definitely working on behind the scenes at the moment. But would welcome people's thoughts on and how we can kind of do more to push on the cold homes agenda and kind of take action on that. So yeah, completely take your point, Susan, that we need to make sure that it covers a huge range of bases and all the things that we can do to bring down fuel poverty and improve people's homes.
Thank you, Simon. That was a brilliant last word. And I think if people can take one thing away from this, is that the work still very much continues in the warm home space, and that there are still so many amazing partners and collaborations that are happening, and that let this be a call to all of us to continue to be involved, to continue to collaborate, to share what we're working on, be generous with one another, and particularly I think that local support piece has come through really strongly today. So thank you so much to all of the panelists for that super interesting discussion, and thank you all for coming along and asking questions. So we've recorded this, and it will be available afterwards if you would like to share the recording or watch it again. Why not? So thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.